When word of the attack on Hiroshima reached the scientists at Los Alamos National Laboratory in the United States on August 6, 1945, physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer was greeted at the base theater by a roaring, foot-stomping crowd. The man who had done more than any other to create the atom bomb responded by clasping his hands over his head like a boxing champion. Yet, at a celebration party later that evening, a few couples danced, but others just quietly talked and drank, unsure of what to feel. Off in one corner, Oppenheimer discussed a telex that had just arrived from Washington with the first damage reports. The chief scientist grew depressed. As he left the party, he saw a young scientist throwing up in the bushes. He said to himself, "The reaction has begun." But it had not. Not yet. Most Americans approved of dropping 2 atomic bombs on Japan. Some wished their countrymen had dropped more. Many people, millions of veterans returning home, their long-awaiting families, were grateful to have avoided an invasion. Their worries focused more on whether Russia would get the bomb, or about whether they could find a new car or a house, a job, or a spouse. The race for the atomic bomb was on. Apparently, all belligerents in World War II sought to develop powerful and devastating weaponry. As early as 1939, German scientists had discovered how to split uranium atoms, the technology that would ultimately allow for the creation of the atomic bomb. Albert Einstein, who had immigrated to the United States in 1933 to escape the Nazis, urged President Roosevelt to launch an American atomic research project, and Roosevelt agreed to do so with reservations. In late 1941, the program received its code name, the Manhattan Project. Located at Los Alamos, New Mexico, the Manhattan Project ultimately employed 150,000 people and cost some $2 billion. In July 1945, the project's scientists successfully tested the first atomic bomb. In the spring of 1945, the military began to prepare for the possible use of an atomic bomb by choosing appropriate targets. Suspecting that the immediate bomb blast would extend over 1 mile and secondary effects would include fire damage, a compact city of significant military value with densely built frame buildings seemed to be the best target. The final target list was decided through secure messages between Secretary of War Henry Stimson, who was in Potsdam, and General Groves, who was in Washington, D.C. The main targets. Hiroshima was chosen as the main target, but General Groves insisted on having backup options in case something went wrong. They decided not to target Kyoto because of its cultural significance, so they looked at other options like Kokura and Nagasaki. Nagasaki, a port city on Kyushu with 2 munitions factories, seemed to fit their needs. 10 days after the Trinity test, with the final targets agreed upon, the United States, Great Britain, and China issued a joint declaration. They called for Japan to surrender and warned that if Japan refused, they would face swift destruction. Since the Soviet Union hadn't officially declared war on Japan, they didn't take part in this declaration. A directive was then sent to the commander of the Strategic Air Forces in the Pacific, instructing the 20th Air Force to drop the first of what could be many nuclear bombs. Eventually, the city of Hiroshima, the headquarters of the Japanese Second Army and communications and supply hub for all of southern Japan, was chosen. The time of destruction. At 2:45 a.m. on Monday, August 6, 1945, 3 American B-29 bombers of the 509th Composite Group took off from an airfield on the Pacific island of Tinian, 1,500 miles south of Japan. Colonel Paul Tibbets piloted the lead bomber, Enola Gay, which carried a nuclear bomb nicknamed Little Boy. Just after 8:15 a.m., Little Boy fell almost 6 miles in 43 seconds before detonating at an altitude of 2,000 feet. The bomb vaporized people half a mile away from ground zero. Bronze statues melted, roof tiles fused together, and the exposed skin of people miles away burned from the intense infrared energy unleashed. At least 80,000 people died instantly. The Fat Man. And then, after 3 days, the city of Kokura was chosen as the primary target of the second bomb, and Nagasaki, an industrial center producing war material and the largest seaport in southern Japan, was selected as a secondary target. In the early morning hours of August 9th, a B-29 bomber headed toward the primary target of Kokura, Japan. However, smoke and haze clouded the target, so it was diverted to the secondary target, Nagasaki, chosen because of its importance as a key industrial center and major port. At 11:02 a.m., the bomber dropped Fat Man on Nagasaki. Almost everything within half a mile of the blast was completely destroyed. Within a mile and a half, most homes were leveled. As far away as 10,000 feet from the blast, combustible materials such as paper immediately caught on fire. It is not entirely clear how many people were killed by the atomic attack. The death toll ranges anywhere from 40,000 to 90,000. According to the U.S. Department of Energy, the number of deaths probably approached 70,000, with perhaps ultimately twice that number dead total within 5 years. Planning was still on for more destruction. Before the US dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, some working on the Manhattan Project thought that 2 atomic bombs would not be enough to force Japan to surrender. In fact, there were plans to ready several more bombs for use on Japan through the end of October. Just after the Trinity test, Major General Leslie R. Groves responded to J. Robert Oppenheimer's idea of turning Little Boy into multiple atom bombs, saying, "It is necessary to drop the first Little Boy and the first Fat Man, and probably a second one in accordance with our original plan. It may be that as many as 3 of the latter in their best present condition may have to be dropped to conform with the planned strategic operations." He thought the US may need to use as many as 4 bombs. According to a declassified memo, the third bomb was set to be detonated sometime after August 17th or 18th. The target for this third bomb remains unknown. Preparations for a third bombing continued until September 2nd, when Japan signed a formal surrender. The day after the bombing of Nagasaki, with the third bomb almost ready for use, Truman stepped in and said that no more atomic bombs would be dropped without his direct order. According to Commerce Secretary Henry Wallace, the thought of killing possibly another 100,000 people, including all those kids, was the reason Truman asserted direct control over further strikes. At least 60,000 people were killed at Nagasaki. But that was not it. The war was not over. There were other planes. The second Fat Man. The United States was planning to detonate a second Fat Man on Japan. It wasn't until after the war ended that new meaning was given to the bombs dropped over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A surge of memoirs produced by those involved in the Manhattan Project asserted it was common knowledge that 2 atomic bombs would be enough. But before the attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, no one thought 2 bombs would end the war. Most certainly, not the 2 men in charge of the Manhattan Project. 3 days after the Trinity test, General Groves wrote to Oppenheimer that it would be necessary to drop Little Boy and Fat Man, and possibly 2 more Fat Man bombs. The pilot of the plane that dropped Little Boy, Colonel Pat Tibbets, was thinking that it would take 5 atomic bombs to force surrender. He had 15 bombers and trained crews ready to go in case they needed to drop more atomic bombs during the war. After Major Charles Sweeney, flying boxcar, dropped the second atomic bomb on Nagasaki on August 9, 1945, General Curtis LeMay asked Colonel Paul Tibbets, group leader of the 509th Composite Group, "Do you have any more of these damn bombs?" Tibbets replied that he would have to retrieve the core for the third bomb from the States. Tibbets was refueling on the West Coast for the return flight when Hirohito's broadcast was made on August 15th. Immediately after the news of Nagasaki reached Truman on August 9th, the president had suspended the use of atomic weapons. LeMay and Tibbets were shooting for August 18th to mount the third atomic mission. Still, the question remains, why did that warmongering Truman bomb a second Japanese city so quickly after Hiroshima was bombed? Well, Truman had authorized the use of atomic weapons against Japanese cities while at Potsdam. The details of that order were in the hands of LeMay and Tibbets, and those guys were seasoned professionals. On the morning of August 7th, Tibbets, who had hardly slept in the past 48 hours and was hungover after a huge celebration, began the preparation for a second atomic bomb mission against Kokura. The mission was scheduled to take off in a mere 48 hours. But that is not it. On August 13th, 1945, 4 days after the bombing of Nagasaki, two military officials had a phone conversation about how many more bombs to detonate over Japan and when. According to the declassified conversation, there was a third bomb set to be dropped on August 19th. The location for the third bombing was Tokyo. But the reason it was not bombed was because the emperor lived there. If the emperor had died, the Japanese could not and would not surrender. The atomic bombs were used to end the war. They felt they had three choices: tell the Japanese they had a city-destroying bomb and hope that would be enough for them to surrender. This was sort of used, as the Japanese were warned if they did not surrender, they would be bombed by a big bomb that would kill thousands. This warning was ignored. The second choice was to detonate an atomic bomb in the Tokyo harbor, and hopefully the Japanese would surrender. But the Japanese are a very proud people and will sacrifice themselves for the good of the country, so culturally, it was unlikely a surrender would occur. The beginning of the end. So, the decision was made that the quickest way to get the Japanese to surrender was systematically bomb cities until they did. There were about 9 targets. Hiroshima was first, about a fortnight after a general warning from the Allies. Even after Japan surrendered on August 15th, there were fears of a militarist coup in Japan that would restart the war. Preparations for the third atomic strike continued until September 7th, the day the American occupation of Japan began. The idea that it was always meant to be 2 bombs heavily permeated American society. But the purpose of the Manhattan Project was not to produce 2 bombs and call it a day. The Manhattan Project was designed to build an entire bomb-making industry. Luckily, Japan's surrender erased the third shot from popular memory, helped along by a revised narrative from official sources. The idea that it was always meant to be 2 bombs settled into the stories Americans told about the war, and just like that, the third shot was forgotten. Alright, that wraps up the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay notified about our uploads. I'll see you next time. Till then, peace out.